Hello my friends and welcome to Flying Circus Models. This is the full build video of my Jeannin Stahltaube project from Wingnut Wings. I want to confess that Taube is one of my favorite World War I planes. I really like the shape of it, how it looks like the real bird, especially when the aircraft flies in the air and you look at it from the ground. The kit is fantastic as always. Wingnut Wing kits are amazing. A very interesting thing that Wingnut Wings made the plastic on the wings and tail section so thin that it looks like it's almost transparent. As usual, we need to remove the major cockpit parts like the floor, both seats, gas tank, firewall and both fuselage sides from the sprues and clean them. Once all major parts were cleaned, I painted the metal parts in Mr. Color Black as the base for aluminum color. I'm a huge believer that all metallic colors should be applied over the black base paint. Then the nose and firewall were painted with Mr. Color aluminum paint. All other metal parts and details of the cockpit I painted with RLM-02 color. The fuselage halves were painted with Mr. Color tan paint as the linen. And other wooden parts like floor, wooden part of the firewall and cockpit divider part were painted with Vallejo beige color as the base for oil paints that I will use to paint the wood structure. Once the base paint dried, I left it for a couple of hours and I used oil paints and dry flat brush to paint the wood structure. I used my regular technique to do it. For the part of the floor I used a lighter raw sienna color, and for the darker type of the wood, burnt umber. I decided to use different paints just to make the look of the floor not so even and a bit more interesting. The technique is pretty easy and straightforward. You just need to add some paint drops on the brush. You can mix the paint with white spirit or any mineral spirit, so it's not too thick, and paint the wood grains. The great thing about oil paints is that it takes some time for them to dry, sometimes 2 or 3 days, and if you don't like the result, you always can remove the paint with the white spirit or just with the napkin, and start from the beginning. Both seats and cushion for the pilot were painted in cocoa brown as the leather. Now it's time for the instrument decals. They are fantastic as always. The sea details were highlighted with the help of a very thin Indian red oil paint, mixed with the white spirit. Now it's time for the internal rigging, and because it's the early World War I plane, it had a lot of it. So I cut plenty of 0.6mm brass tubes and used metal turnbuckles this time. I don't really like to use them because there are a lot of defective parts. I prefer resin turnbuckles. However, because of Canada Post strike, I didn't receive my order on time. Thus, I had to use whatever I had in my stash. Luckily, the strike is over now, and I'm looking forward to get my online order with a lot of anchor points and turnbuckles soon. And again, the usual way of making rigging that I showed many times in my videos, so I will not show the whole process on every detail. I will ask you to subscribe to the channel and become my Patreon instead. The internal and cross rigging were completed on all cockpit details. Then I removed photo etch seat belts and placed them on the Tamiya tape. It's very convenient during the paint process because they don't fly everywhere and you can paint them much easier. And I painted them with Tamiya XF59. Metal fasteners and sliders were painted with the metallic color, and I used Tamiya accent color to highlight seatbelt details. Same accent color liquid was used to show some gas stains on the gas tank. The main cockpit parts were glued together, and I decided to use easy line for control wires that go to the tail section. I didn't glue the control stick with wheel and put the easy line freely through it. Also, I drilled small holes in the puller and put the wire through them too. Because easy line wire can stretch, you can move the control stick back and forth without any problems. Moreover, I added control wires to the rudder and glued them to the pedals. The final steps were to add and glue internal struts and seat belts, and I can say that the cockpit is ready and we can close the fuselage. Because this plane didn't have a rotary engine that spilled oils everywhere, I decided to add just some drops of oils in the engine bay. I used the water-based black wash and spilled it with the help of brush and toothpick. on the bottom of the bay and on the firewall. The Mercedes engine was completed out of camera, and you can see the video of how-to in the description. I added wires to the spark plugs and from ignition coils. I used the same black wash to highlight engine details and show some small oil leaks. When the wash dried a bit, I removed the excessive one with the help of the cotton stick. Then I glued the engine to its place and added some extra pipes and wires. I used 1mm brass tube, bent it with about 90-degree angle, and with the 0.2mm copper wire added the tube to the carburetors. And now is the time to close the fuselage halves and glue them together. I didn't have any problems with that, everything matched and took their places perfectly. Of course, I had some small steps that I filled with the super glue, and it worked as a putty. When the glue dried, I sanded it with 400 first and 600 grit sandpaper after. The model was covered with Mr. Surfacer 1500 gray primer, and I applied 1mm masking tape only on the top side, between pilots and observer seats. Then I covered the nose with black paint as the base for aluminum metallic. Then I covered the nose part with black paint as the base for aluminum metallic, and that worked as a pre-shading on the top and tail section to make elevator ribs darker after the main color. whole fuselage, except of nose section, basically everything that was covered with the linen was painted with the base RLM gray color, and I used Tamiya XF22 paint for this. On the elevator, I applied very light layers of the paint in order not to destroy the pre-shading effect. Also, to add more Wizarding effect on the thin elevator, I used the mix of base gray-green with tan paint. My idea was that this will be like fading effect on the linen. The nose section was masked and covered with Mr. Super Metal Color aluminum. Here are the pictures of the real plane with 283/14 serial number, and you may notice some patches of clear DOP linen that were unpainted to the gray-green, and these are the places of fabric repair or something like that. And I painted them as close as possible to the real picture with tan color. And here comes the fun part, painting of the worms on the aluminum surface of the engine covers. The base paint was nitro-based, and this one is water-based aluminum with the different shade. I used a very small 10x0 brush, and with the free hand painted those worms. On the museum Stahltaube, you can see the worms with the shape of fish scales, but in the real picture of the real plane, they look more chaotic to me, not like a fish scale at all. First, I tried to match the picture shapes, but then just painted them without matching and as it goes. And here's the results after a couple of hours of painting. I covered both wings with Tamiya wooden tan color. It's darker than the main base paint that will be applied later. The next step is to mask wing ribs, and I used Tamiya masking tape with different sizes. 1 mm for the ribs and 2 mm for the main spars. I had to match them on the upper and lower surfaces. painted them over the masks with the lighter tan color. So right now the time to remove masking tape again. As you can see, I had some steps of the paint where masks were, and that means that I put a very thick layer of the paint there. To remove them, I used 800 grit wet sandpaper with a few drops of water, and with a very light pressure I was able to sand those steps from top and bottom surfaces. To add some more lead-in fade-in on the top sides of the wings, I used Vallejo leather brown paint that had about 80% of thinner, and with the help of stencils and low air pressure, I painted uneven shades / stains. After the painting, the whole model was covered with the layer of feature and I started to apply decals. The usual process. We need to put microset first to the place where the decal will be, so this will make the process of adhesion faster. Apply decals and with the help of a cotton stick, remove all air bubbles that can be below decal. This step is very important, so the decal can stick and repeat the surface of the model. Once it was completed, I covered the decals with microsol to make it softer and to repeat the shape much better. Once it was completed, I covered the decals with microsol to make it softer and to repeat the shape better. Probably because the model is already old, the cross decals started to break when I tried to position them, but it wasn't critical. Same steps with other decals on the model, like serial numbers, national crosses on the tail, and as you can see, the decal there is a bit bigger, so I will need to cut it later. The next step is to glue wings, but before I do it, I wanted to point on the radiators that I glued, and I removed the left side of the engine cover. To glue the wings, I applied a heavy layer of super glue, put them on their places, and gave a couple of hours for glue to dry. Then I covered the whole model, except of the nose of course, with semi-gloss clear coat. And you can see how the shine of feature disappears with every layer of clear varnish. Now is the time to add a little bit more detailing. Some fuel lines from the gravity tank. I drilled a small hole in the fuel connector that goes to the main tank and glued a 0.6 mm copper wire. Then we need to add one more line to the engine that goes from the top of the tank. Based on the real picture, this line had two different sizes. So I used 0.8 and 0.6 mm brass tube pieces. I inserted them one to another like telescopic tubes and glued copper wires to the sides. Brass tubes were painted in black and copper wires in brass colors. The exhaust pipe was painted in Mr. Hobby number 18 steel color and covered with rust dry pigments. This plane, as almost any other World War I plane, had spoked wheels, and you have two options in the kit, plastic and photo H ones. I decided to go with the last option. Even though photo H parts are flat, the spokes are much thinner. I had to bend it a little to match the wheel diameter and glue very carefully to the rims/tires and central hub. There is one more photo H part that has to be glued that will cover spokes on the rims. And here's the plastic wheel option. It also looks okay, but if we compare them with photo H parts, spokes look way too big. I used Tamiya XF22 paint to paint rims and light gray color for the tires. And while I'm painting them, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done it yet for some weird reason and support me on Patreon. Thank you so much. It's that time now, the rigging time. I saw a lot of comments that the rigging on this plane is too complicated. I can say it just looks like that. First, we need to cut a bunch of small brass tube pieces, and I used 0.6mm one from Albion Alloys. It's very easy to do with the regular model knife or scalpel in my case. Just little pressure in order not to bend the tube, and with small rolling moves the tube will be cut. Then I used 1/48 scale one-sided resin turnbuckles from Gaspatch models and glued them on their pre-drilled places with the same angle as the rigging line goes. For the rigging itself, I used Easy Line, and the process is usual to all my projects. Put the line to the turnbuckle, then both of them to the tube piece, fix one side with the super glue, and repeat the process on the other side of the line. Once the glue dried, with this material it's almost immediate process, we can cut the excess rigging. As I said before, the rigging process just looks very complicated. You just need to take your time, don't rush the process, and add one line after another. The trickiest part was to add one end lines. The model has pre-drilled holes, and I glued one end very carefully with super glue, then attached it to the strut in the usual way. And speaking about that, you can see that they were bent a bit with the tension on one side, and I glued the hook with also a lot of tension on other side until it became straight. After a few days of work, the rigging was completed. And yes, I didn't show the whole process because you will be bored with it. You can view it in my how-to video. With the difference, I used easy line, not nylon one, and brass tubes instead of medical needles. The next step is to add more resilient effects with the help of sandy wash. I applied it to the landing gear and wheels. Once the wash dried, I used dry pigments to add more dust on the wheels, landing gear, and the tail section of the model. The final step is to glue the propeller, and I painted it with the same way as on my how-to video and with the help of oil paints. Finally, the model is completed, and I hope you will like the result. As usual, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, press like button and leave your comments below. I read and reply to all of them. Also, if you would like to support my channel, you can do it on Patreon, where you can see my videos early. Also, I share some interesting pictures there. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next builds.